You're now watching Wayback Wednesday, sponsored by Davenport Auto Park, the ride of your life. And also sponsored by Flores Glass, serving the area since 1977 with residential and commercial work.
Friends, and welcome to another episode of Wayback Wednesday. I'm your host, Randy Adcox. Tonight's show is kind of brought about. We had someone call into the station a week or so ago and ask if we could do a segment on the Rocky Mount Sanitarium Hospital. Many of you remember that, staple in Rocky Mount medical care, health care over the years, certainly from my childhood up until the 1980s even. But and there's a lot of history there in that hospital, as there were with Parkview Hospital and the old Atlantic Coastline Railroad Hospital as well. But I got to digging tonight, or yesterday, in fact, getting in preparation for the night show, and I found a couple things that surprised me in one sense, and it caused me to have a look back at a topic we've covered many times on this show, Rocky Mount meals. And I'll get to the correlation there in a minute. But I didn't find as many pictures as I thought I might. I was a little surprised that I couldn't find more pictures on the sanitarium. What's out there, I've seen on the internet, I don't know, probably a half a dozen pictures maybe of the sanitarium, and they seem to be linked in a couple of different categories. When the hospital was first built, there was a postcard or two came out back 1913, and so I've got a picture that I'll share with you tonight. And then the hospital went through a couple renovations over the years, and so we'll get to those in a moment. But I want to just read a little bit. I found an article, a couple of them in fact, that was really interesting to me. And you know, you can't talk about the sanitarium hospital without talking about two brothers who were instrumental in getting that hospital going. Oh, we got a call. Let's get this call off the get-go. Hello, caller, you on the air?
Yes, I was born in Sanatorium Hospital. I was born in 1953, and I was born in Sanatorium Hospital. And also last week, when you were talking about Body Noble's Mill Pond Road, that was called Wiggins Lake out there, and they had that dance hall and stuff and a snack shop out there and everything. And it was like a little beachfront out there, and you could go out there and swim with your family and stuff.
Oh yeah, it was a popular place in the summertime for many, many years. It sure was.
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, thanks for calling and sharing that with us. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Yeah, that's something else I wanted to put out tonight. You know, the last couple of weeks we were showing these John Sorsby shows from the pictures from the Sorsby collection, and there were so many of them I was kind of trying to get through them all, so I didn't leave a lot of time the last couple of weeks shows for people to call in. So tonight I want to welcome you to call in. I don't have a lot of pictures to share with you tonight, so feel free to call in, share your memories, not only of the Sanitarium Hospital. I have some memories of the hospital myself. I spent some time in that hospital, in fact, many, many years ago. But when we get to the meal pictures, especially at Rocky Mount Meals, I know a lot of you grew up on the Mill Hill, as it was called, and as did many in my family. And so there's a lot of history in that area and a lot of memories. So feel free to give us a call tonight. 407-1111 is the number. I'd love to hear from you anytime during the show. Before the call came in, I was talking about the two brothers who were just a staple in Rocky Mount history as far as hospital goes, Dr. Bob and Dr. Lim, as they were commonly called, the Carnegies. And so when I was doing the research for the night show, of course I kept seeing those two names popping up all the time. What I didn't realize was that their father actually was instrumental in getting the hospital started in 1913. But anyway, I ran across this article, and I'll share this with you first. There's two or three I want to get to, and we'll get to those, and then we'll get some pictures. But anyway, this was actually, I found this from the Nash County Archives at the USG, it's a state website, USGen Web is what it's called actually. Anyway, it says the Rocky Mountain Sanitarium was opened in 1913 by Dr. L.W. Carnegie, Dr. John L. Lane, and Dr. Walter Staley as a general hospital of 40 beds serving eastern North Carolina. The Rocky Mount Sanitarium Nurses Training School opened in conjunction with the hospital. In 1922, the sanitarium was sold to a Franciscan order of nuns who operated a hospital for 1 year. At the end of that year, the nuns sold the hospital back to Carnegie. In 1920, the hospital was enlarged by adding a wing on the Church Street side and remodeling the original building. In 1934, the hospital was enlarged by adding a separate obstetrical department of 12 beds. In 1952, a total interior renovation was undertaken. The hospital was completely air-conditioned. A sprinkler system was installed. It was with great regret that in 1950, the sanitarium found it necessary to close the nurses' training school. From 1913 to 1950, many competent nurses graduated from this school. In addition to the 3 founders mentioned in the opening paragraph, some of the physicians who have played a part in the early history of Rocky Mount Sanitarium are the late Dr. D.L. Knowles, the late Dr. George Wimberly, Dr. Richard Spate, Dr. E.R. Hines, the late Dr. A.L. Daltridge, Dr. Richard S. Anderson, and the late Dr. William Dixon. Brookwood Health Service Incorporated took over management of the Rocky Mount Sanitarium in January 1977. So there's some history about the sanitarium hospital. As I said, it was started in 1913, and the 2 brothers I mentioned, Dr. Lim and Dr. Bob, their father, the original Dr. Lim, L.W. Carnegie, was instrumental in getting it started, and in fact ended up owning the hospital when it was sold back to him after the nuns had it for a year and sold it back to him as the sole owner. So, and then, as I was looking, trying to find a little more about the hospital and the 2 doctors themselves, as you might imagine, there was a lot of accolades and a lot of praise for both Dr. Bob and Dr. Lim. They were certainly care providers for my family on many occasions. As I said, I actually spent a night in that hospital when I was a very young child. You probably heard me tell this story before. I was up in a cherry tree of all things, and I fell out of the cherry tree and landed on my head and knocked out cold as a cucumber. And so I ended up in the hospital, spent the night there just for observation, and went home the next day. But in any case, I know a lot of people here in Rocky Mount were born in the sanitarium hospital. It was a place to go if you're anywhere near there, if you had cuts, bruises, if you're injured, sick. It was certainly not the only hospital in the area, but it treated a lot of people over the years, and a lot of people were very, very fond of Dr. Lim and Dr. Bob. This is a story I found about Dr. Bob that appeared in the Rocky Mount Telegram in 1995. By the way, Lee, if you would, let's go ahead and put up that item number 1, which is the postcard from 1913. It's the oldest picture I could find, and it is a picture of the Rocky Mount Sanitarium Hospital as it was in 1913. And you can see the old Model A there, and then the horse-drawn buggy behind it. So anyway, that's how the hospital looked originally. I don't ever remember seeing it that way. It had changed dramatically by the time I came along, but that was original, the way the hospital looked in 1913. As I said, this article appeared in the Rocky Mount Telegram Sunday, March 12, 1995. And it starts off as this way. The year was 1952. The patient, a young man, was an accident victim with painful, debilitating bone injuries in one leg. Following a series of operations to repair the damage, his doctor, Robert D. Carnegie, reached the conclusion that amputation was the only recourse. Prior to performing that extreme surgical procedure, however, the doctor advised this patient to seek a second opinion at Duke Hospital. The verdict by Duke specialists: young man, if your surgeon is Bob Carnegie in Rocky Mount, you're in excellent hands. We concur with his diagnosis and refer you back to him. So that's pretty good praise there from surgeons at Duke. Told this patient that if Bob Carnegie is your surgeon and he tells you arm got to come off, it's got to come off. There's no way around it. It says such personal affirmations about Dr. Bob Carnegie are legion. The integrity of an individual can be measured in large degree by the meaningful contributions he makes within his community. Dr. Bob, as he became known to his patients, touched thousands of lives in a remarkable positive way through many years as he practiced surgical medicine in Rocky Mount. From his boyhood days, he was committed to becoming a surgeon, following in the footsteps of his father, Dr. L.W. Carnegie Sr., who had founded a private hospital, Rocky Mount Sanitarium. To prepare himself for this lifetime career, Bob Carnegie began his college preparatory education at Danville, Virginia Military Academy, then entered Davidson College, a school widely acclaimed for the study of pre-med. During summer vacations, the young student returned to Rocky Mount to work in available jobs at the sanitarium, primarily to become a shadow to his respected father. He observed and absorbed techniques utilized in that surgical medical environment, as well as interactions involving patient-doctor relationships. Completing his pre-med studies at Davidson, Bob applied to Duke Medical School, at that time in its infancy, having graduated only one class. Following his 1933 graduation from med school, he was accepted for a 2-year residency at the prestigious Robert Packer Memorial Hospital in Sawyer, Pennsylvania. As his formal education was nearing completion, international affairs were volatile, with Adolf Hitler's German war machine running rampant in Europe. Dr. Bob volunteered for service in the United States Army shortly before the Japanese air attack on Pearl Harbor. He was assigned to the U.S. Medical Corps in the European theater and served with the 11th Evacuation Hospital in the African, Italian, and Sicilian invasion as World War II raged. He operated in field hospitals such as those later designated as MASH units, immediately behind explosive battle lines. That war proved to be a catalyst in medicine, testing a young, newly graduated doctor, forced by circumstances to become expediently and successfully innovative as he practiced wartime surgery for almost 4 years. According to his colleagues, Dr. Bob was a natural surgeon, possessing intuitive talents, and was highly adept with instruments and surgical techniques. He brought these finely honed skills with him to Rocky Mount in 1945 when he was released from the Army. That same year, his father died, and Dr. Bob became chief of surgery and head of the Rocky Mount Sanitarium, assuming enormous responsibility for so young a person. When he returned to Rocky Mount, he brought his bride of a few months, the former Ann Ennis, and the couple subsequently reared their 3 children here, Robert Jr., Judith, and William Ennis. World War II had created an explosion in medical discoveries, knowledge, equipment, technique, and an advanced arsenal of drugs. It marked the advent of a golden age of medicine, and in this rapidly changing medical environment, Bob Carnegie began his lifetime work in Rocky Mount. Always a medical scholar, Dr. Bob read and studied continually to keep pace with high technology advances in medicine. He immediately embarked on a renovation schedule for the sanitarium, bringing the physical facility up to the higher standards in an area of prevailing construction shortages. The building became the first totally air-conditioned hospital in eastern North Carolina. In addition to his inherent abilities in the practice of surgical medicine, Dr. Bob brought to the medical arena time-honored traditions and humanitarian values. He never refused anyone who called him for medical attention. His patients were always first priority. He frequently worked straight through a 24-hour period under duress all night, yet maintained his composure and good humor. Regardless of unexpected demands upon him, he made hospital rounds both morning and evening, stopped to speak with all patients, even those under the care of other staff members. His professional colleagues quickly learned that Bob Carnegie was a man of absolute and total integrity, a man to be implicitly trusted, always honest. He never compromised his principles. They learned, too, that Bob Carnegie was a totally devoted husband and father who took pride and delight in his family, spending his free time in family activities. His compassion for and understanding of his patients is legendary. That combination, plus his special gift for relating to people in all walks of life, led to the development of a tremendous and loyal following. His friendly, outgoing personality resulted in respect and love not only from patients, but from all the hospital staff. Dr. Bob's peers and colleagues relied upon his good humor and storehouse of jokes to present a balance in the daily serious responsibilities of treating the sick and saving lives. Throughout his practice of medicine, Dr. Bob exhibited a quiet confidence and victorious spirit in the face of crisis which ended his productive life. He leaves an invaluable contribution to the medical community of Rocky Mount and a legacy of warm devotion, strength, and courage to his former patients. I didn't intend to read the whole article, but frankly, there was just not a good place to stop reading. It's again a testimony to the kind of man Bob Carnegie was. And Lee, in fact, let's go ahead. I meant to tell you earlier and I forgot to. Go ahead and go to item number 2. This was from 1920 when the sanatorium underwent one of its many renovations. You know, it's remarkable how different that hospital changed from 1913 to 1920. Same building, but a remarkable change took place in it. The renovation was just unbelievable. And of course, it changed again in later years. As I said, I did research on both Dr. Bob and Dr. Lim. I found a little bit here about I read this is a very short article here. Dr. Lemuel, and his middle name was Weiler, W-E-Y-L-E-R. Dr. Lemuel Weiler Carnegie was born in 1881. Oh, this is the father. To Robert Carnegie and Henrietta Eleanor Parrott Carnegie. His wife was Lenami Dumas Carnegie. Dr. Carnegie co-founded the Rocky Mount Sanitarium with John L. Lane and Dr. Walter Stanley in 1913. It opened as a general hospital of 40 beds serving East North Carolina. And it goes on to talk a little bit about, you know, how he got the hospital started. He died in Rocky Mount on December 18, 1944. As I mentioned earlier, that was the same year that, well, it says here 1944, but his son came back from the war in 1945, and in that article it said that his father died that same year. So a little bit of discrepancy there between the year that the father died. But in any case, and then of course, the other brother, Dr. Lim, was also respected and admired by his peers, and his obituary appeared March 5th, 1919. It says Dr. Lemuel Carnegie Jr., he was 88 when he died on October 2nd, 2007 after a brief battle with cancer. Dr. Carnegie was born in Rocky Mount on March 5th, 1919. He was a graduate of Rocky Mount Senior High School, Davidson College, and Duke University Medical School. In 1944, he entered the United States Army as a captain and served with the 115th General Hospital in England, France, and Germany. After returning from Europe, he continued his graduate training in Texas and Missouri. In 1950, he became Chief of Staff and Surgeon of the Warren General Hospital in Warrenton. He served in that position until 1962 when he returned to Rocky Mount to practice at the Rocky Mount Sanitarium and the Community Hospital. Dr. Carnegie remained in private practice until 1998 when he retired at the age of 79. Dr. Carnegie was a member of the National Board of Medical Examiners as well as serving as a diplomat for the organization. He also belonged to the Nash Edgecombe Medical Society, the North Carolina State Medical Society, and the Southern Medical Association. He was a member of the Birmingham New Country Club. Was preceded in death by his parents and his brother. He was survived by his wife of 54 years, Nancy Gilliam Carnegie, and of course his children. It mentions Lemuel Carnegie III, Jane Carnegie, and of course some grandchildren. But Dr. Lim also was, you know, that's something I didn't realize, that both of these brothers served in World War II. They were both surgeons in the war, both, you know, treated wounded soldiers, no doubt. And it was that wartime training, I'm sure they would admit themselves, it was that wartime care for wounded soldiers that probably gave them a skill set they would not have otherwise gotten. I'm sure they would have rather not gotten the way they did. But in any case, that having to work under pressure, under adverse conditions, certainly being in like a mass unit, literally right behind the front lines of the war, had to be nerve-wracking, harrowing, terrifying at times, I'm sure. But to work and do surgery under those kind of conditions gave these men just an extreme advantage over most medical students coming out of medical school. Okay, Lee, bring it back to me. I see it's time for our first commercial break. I mentioned there are some more pictures, and when we come back, I'm going to show you a couple more pictures of the hospital. Like I said, there was not very many out there. I did look, and there's just not a lot to choose from. So when we come back from the break, I'll show you a couple more. And then we'll get into some Rocky Mountain Mills history, and we'll talk a little bit about some interesting things from Rocky Mountain Mills in days gone by. All right, Lee, go ahead and take us to a commercial break if you would. Folks, we'll be right back with more Wayback Wednesday.
I'm Daniel Moss, owner of Cornerstone Funeral Home, and I'd like to invite you and your family to give our family an opportunity to serve you in your time of need. And we offer a full line of funeral services, everything from visitations to graveside services to cremations on site with a live crematory, as well as a banquet hall to meet the catering needs of our families that we serve. We offer catering service, we offer refreshments prior to visitations and services of our family, and we want to invite you to come and experience the difference here at Cornerstone Funeral Home.
When faced with special care needs for elderly or disabled loved ones, families want compassionate, comforting care. That's Tender Touch Home Care Services' goal, providing the level of care we would expect for our own. With over 10 years of home care excellence, Tender Touch provides an array of services that keeps your loved one at home. From personal care, light housekeeping, errands, and meal preparation, to our private duty care program, which combines all of our home care offerings in one package.
Tender Touch Home Care Services, where your needs are our concern.
We're in our 18th year of practice at the Hammer Chiropractic Center, and we've seen over 15,000 different people in the Rocky Mount area. 40% of headaches actually come from a neck problem. Many patients come in taking multiple aspirin, over-the-counter medications and such a day, and we can get you to stop doing that and actually fix the problem so the headaches don't rise anymore. A lot of people think chiropractic hurts. It does not. Most of the people come in and they feel great when they leave.
And we're back. If you're just tuning in, we're talking about the Rocky Mount Sanitarium Hospital. We had someone call in a week or so ago. Didn't talk to me, but talked to someone here in the studio and asked if we could do a segment on the Sanitarium Hospital. And so a couple of days ago I started looking, and then again today. There was just not an awful lot of pictures, unfortunately, out there to choose from. But I think we do have one or two more. Lee, go ahead and put up item number 3, if you would. I think we had just gotten through with number 2. Item number 3 is from the 1950s. I don't have an exact date, but judging by the card, I'd say the early 1950s, 53, 54, maybe somewhere along in there. But there's something about this view of the hospital here. I don't know, it almost looks like a residence or something, like a castle, I guess is one way to say it. But at the same time, it's almost got a spooky look too. And I've heard other people say that it was an ominous look to the hospital. But in any case, and by the way, we've talked about Coastline Street many times on the show in the past, but that was a street directly in front of the hospital. Church Street would be to your left, and Coastline Street, of course, it's no longer there. It's no longer a street named Coastline, but that was directly in front of the hospital. And in fact, the address for the hospital was Coastline Street. Somewhere I've got the actual physical address, but in any case, it was Coastline Street. So I can't say I remember the little white picket fence there that separated the parking lot from the street. It must have been gone by the time I came along in the early 1960s. But in any case, that was a view that many of you may remember of the sanatorium from the early 1950s. In later years, of course, Sanitarium Hospital changed hands a couple times. It got bought out. In 1980, however, it went through another major renovation, and when it was sold, not sold, it was rebuilt. Lee, put up item number 4 if we would. This was actually what minutes referred to as a community hospital, but there was a crowd of thousands that showed up when this new hospital, it was later became community hospital. And I didn't realize, my understanding, at least from my memory I should say, was that this hospital opened up as community hospital. But in fact, according to what I was reading today, it opened up as a sanitarium hospital and later became known as community hospital. Of course, today it's known as the Post-Acute Medical Care Facility, or PAM. I spent a few weeks in there actually back year before last when I had COVID. Fine folks took good care of me there. But in any case, there was a lot of hoopla when this place opened up. In fact, there was an article appeared in the Rocky Mount Telegram June 2nd, 1980. It says, big crowds attend formal opening of the new sanitarium. A throng of approximately 9,000 to 10,000 people turned out yesterday to tour the new Rocky Mount Sanitarium Hospital. far exceeding hospital officials' hopes. Helping steer crowds to the new facility was Birmingham resident Meg Carter. Carter, as Director of Public Relations for Brookwood Health Services, has overseen many grand openings for the corporation, which owns or manages 17 hospitals besides the sanitarium. I've never witnessed anything like this in my life, an excited Carter said this morning. I've never seen such a batch of excited people like this in my life. There was hugging and kissing, just a warm feeling in their hearts of what the building represents. 3 buses shuttled visitors to the facility from makeshift parking along roadways within a half-a-mile radius of the hospital. Meanwhile, kitchen employees were frantically trying to augment prepared refreshments by baking more cookies in the hospital's kitchen and making punch out of water. The turnout is very definitely attributed to the Carnegies, Dr. Bob and Dr. Lim, whose father founded the hospital in 1913, and the employees, everyone who made the sanitarium what it is and what it was. Ultimately, they set the pace and the standards by which the hospital lives. After yesterday's display of community support, I don't see where there will be any problem filling our 50 beds. Yesterday's grand opening culminated in a 3-year struggle to move the hospital from its ailing 66-year-old facility on Church Street. In June 1977, the sanitarium filed notice of intent to build the new hospital, but for more than a year, the Carnegies and then administrator Andy Hammond had to battle state and federal agencies for the certificate of need, which was required for full Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement. The doctors and Hammond were accompanied by community supporters to several of the necessary hearings. On July 28, 1977, more than 200 supporters traveled to Greenville for a hearing before the Eastern Carolina Health Services Agency. A week later, 450 supporters packed the Regent Ale Auditorium and spoke for 3 hours on behalf of the sanitarium's request. In July 1978, federal approval became definite. Hospital officials broke ground for the new facility June 10th of last year, 1979, of course. And of course, in 1980, the hospital opened. Pretty remarkable that it could be built in literally a year's time frame. But it was a huge outpouring of support, in large part due to the respect for doctors Bob and Lim Carnegie and how involved they had been in getting a hospital running all those years, and their father, of course, too. Item number 5, if you would, Lee. This was actually a picture that I found. I think this is a picture of 3 of the doctors. Can we get item number 5 up there, Lee, on the screen? There we go. That's Dr. Lim there on to your left, Dr. Matt Yenny there in the center, and Dr. Winslow, who was an orthopedic surgeon, retired a few years ago. Many of you may remember Dr. Winslow. He actually practiced out at Winslow, Behringer, and Cristedo out in the Boyce Willis Clinic for many, many years. I didn't realize that he was ever affiliated with a sanitarium hospital, but in fact he was. But this actual article right here was very telling too. In fact, I'm not going to read this whole thing, but I just want to read a little bit of this because there's some good information here too. It says the Rocky Mount Sanitarium's Board of Directors announces that, by the way, this was in February of 1981. It says the Board of Directors announces that Dr. Lemuel W. Carnegie Jr. will be president of the sanitarium's medical staff. Also elected to staff executive positions were Dr. Matthew Penny as vice president and Dr. Jack Winslow as secretary. Other staff appointments were Dr. Neil Atkins, OBGYN, Vincent Andracchio, anesthesia, John T. Avent, OBGYN, Clifford Baggett, ENT, Lloyd Bailey, ophthalmology, DeHaven Cleaver, general surgery, Daniel Crocker, internal medicine and oncology, James Crumpler Jr., ENT, and James Crumpler Sr., pediatrics. So, there was some very good doctors affiliated with Sanitarium Hospital over the years. And as I said, a large part of that was because of the respect that area doctors had for Dr. Bob and Dr. Lim. So it was very easy to attract good quality doctors because of those 2 gentlemen. Item number 6, if you would, Lee, this is Dr. Bob. The only picture that I found of Dr. Bob, and I'm not sure when this was taken, he was a much younger man in this picture than what I remember him. I'm guessing this was probably sometime in the early 1950s, maybe mid-50s, but in any case, That was the only picture I found of Dr. Bob by himself. I'm sure there are others. I should admit also, where, ordinarily I would have used the newspapers.com website extensively in preparation for tonight's show. We had some technical issues and we could not get into the site, so I'm sure there are more pictures out there of Dr. Bob and Dr. Lim in the many, many years of the Rocky Mountain Telegram covering these two doctors. But unfortunately, I just couldn't get into the site to get access to that information for this week's show, so I apologize for that. That was number 6. Item number 7, if you would, Lee. And this is actually what we now refer to as PAM, the Post-Acute Medical Facility. And like I said, I spent about 10 days in here, 16 days in here when I had COVID the year before last. Great folks. They still provide excellent care over there, and I was very well pleased with the care I was given while I was there. Okay, I mentioned that while I was researching tonight's show and sanitarium, just pure coincidence, I stumbled across a reference to Rocky Mountain Meals. And off the top of my head, I cannot remember what it was about, but it kind of got me sidetracked, as quite often can happen when I'm getting ready for a show. And I stumbled across a couple of things that I wanted to share with you tonight. And some of it, I'm going to show you some pictures that we have seen before, because I remember sharing some of these pictures in the past. But there was also, we talked about the newspaper that Rocky Mountain Mills published during World War II. It was called the Riverside Bulletin, and it was published primarily to give our service members who were serving around the world in theaters of war all around the world, kind of give them a link back home. And at the same time, it was a way for people who were from Rocky Mount, not necessarily in the war, but maybe had moved away, but had family still here working at the mill or in some way affiliated with the mill, to keep track of Rocky Mount also. So I don't know how many issues there were. I seem to recall hearing someone talk about that there had been a collection of all these Riverside Bulletin newspapers combined into some sort of, like a book, if you will. I'd love to get my hands on one of those. It's got to be 2 or 3 inches thick if that's the case, because I understand this thing went on for several years. I'm not sure if it covered the entire duration of World War II, but certainly I've seen evidence of it being in circulation from 1944 and 1945. So at least for 2 years of the war, the Riverside Bulletin was being published, and it was mailed out to service members all over the world, as I said. And we'll show you some evidence of that here very shortly. But before we get into that, I always like to, from time to time, go back and look at pictures that we've seen before, just kind of refresh ourselves. You know, you can't underestimate the impact of Rocky Mountain Mills on Rocky Mountain history, and the impact that it had on this part of the state, in fact, developing eastern North Carolina, particularly from the standpoint of, generating jobs and economic impact. And that goes way back, obviously. 1818 was when the mill was built. And of course, it's gone through many renovations over the years. And but in 1865 was the earliest picture that I have found of Rocky Mountain Mills. And Lee, if you would put up item number 8. And as I said, we've seen this picture before. And when I found this picture, it was captioned Rocky Mountain Mills prior to 1865. Now, I'm not exactly sure when this picture was taken, because that's the way it was captioned, prior to 1865. But if you recall from previous shows, in 1863, it was burned. It was burned to the ground by a group of Union soldiers who came up from New Bern and through Tarboro and eventually through Rocky Mount, and just generally wreaking havoc, leaving a lot of waste and damage in their wake. But the mill was burned, of course, and it was burned twice during its 200-year operation. But in any case, this was how it appeared in 1865. Okay, Lee, if we could, let's go to item number 9, and this is a very old picture too. This is from 1911, and I apologize, it's kind of grainy. I have no idea who took this picture. This picture just appeared, and it just said, the caption was Rocky Mountain Mills 1911. The mill itself It's undergone many changes, as I said. It's been remodeled, added on to over the years. The dam itself and the rocks in the area we're looking at there, at one time before the dam that's there now, there was a wooden dam there. And in the years past, when the water would get really, really low in Tar River, you could see evidence of that old wooden dam there, laying at the base of the existing dam. I imagine it's probably still there for that matter, but it was there for many, many years, I know. I used to, as a child, I remember seeing it down there. But in any case, this view looks very similar to what you would see now if you would go stand up there and look toward the mill from this area. Okay, Lee, if we could, then let's go to item number 10. And again, these are just looking back at some pictures that we have looked at in past shows, just kind of refresh your memory. This is a picture of Falls Road. The mill's there on your right. You're looking to the west, and that building to your left there was the Rocky Mount Mills movie theater. This picture was around 1920. Let's take this phone call here. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Yes, the picture just showed of Rocky Mount Mills and the dam.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather used to take us down there fishing, and we used to walk all down those paths, and you could find little bottles like blue bottles and green bottles, like medicine bottles, old-timey medicine bottles.
No kidding. Wow.
And we'd find a lot of them, and we'd find round, hard metal bottles that my grandfather, he was in the World War,
mm-hmm.
And against Japanese.
Right.
And he said they were cannonballs or shotgun balls, like they used to shoot a long time ago.
Okay.
And we dig down there, and we find all these little different color bottles. And I don't know if it's, they had the war over there around that area a long time ago, Civil War or something like that.
There was some Union troops that came through. There was never a battle per se. There wasn't a whole lot of resistance, frankly. When General Potter's troops came through in 1863, they just came up, like I say, from the Neuse River up through New Bern, came through Tarboro into Rocky Mount, and they just burned and pillaged and stole and just tore stuff up.
Yeah, but there was we found a lot of the bottles. We dig, and they were, like a amber green color, and some of them would be a blue, dark blue color. And they were shaped like a old-time medicine bottle or something.
They very well could have been, and it's very possible that they got, floated down the river and washed over the dam and just got lodged there in the sand for you to find them later. Yeah. Well, that's a neat story. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thanks.
All right. Okay. Yeah, but this building here on your left, that was the old movie theater. This was around 1920 when this building was here. It's, of course, long gone now. And you can see the bridge in the distance is the old steel bridge. That's a covered bridge, that long gone, of course. But lots changed in Rocky Mount Mills over the years. Lee, I tell you what, let's go ahead to our next commercial break. I've got some more pictures to show you, and then we're going to get into the the Riverside Bulletin and show you some really neat pictures that came from that newspaper. And so when we come back from the break, we'll get into those things. We'll take your calls. Don't go anywhere, folks. We'll be right back with more Wayback Wednesday. Take it away, Lee.
I'm Daniel Moss, owner of Cornerstone Funeral Home, and I'd like to invite you and your family to give our family an opportunity to serve you in your time of need. And we offer a full line of funeral services, everything from visitations to graveside services to cremations on site with a live crematory, as well as a banquet hall to meet the catering needs of our families that we serve. We offer catering service. We offer refreshments prior to visitations and services of our family. And we want to invite you to come and experience the difference here at Cornerstone Funeral Home.
When faced with special care needs for elderly or disabled loved ones, families want compassionate, comforting care. That's Tender Touch Home Care Services' goal, providing the level of care we would expect for our own. With over 10 years of home care excellence, Tender Touch provides an array of services that keeps your loved one at home. From personal care, light housekeeping, errands, and meal preparation, to our private duty care program, which combines all of our home care offerings in one package.
Tender Touch Home Care Services, where your needs are our concern.
We're in our 18th year of practice at the Hammer Chiropractic Center, and we've seen over 15,000 different people in the Rocky Mount area. 40% of headaches actually come from a neck problem. Many patients come in taking multiple aspirin, over-the-counter medications and such a day, and we can get you to stop doing that and actually fix the problem so the headaches don't rise anymore. A lot of people think chiropractic hurts. It does not. Most of the people come in and they feel great when they leave.
And we're back. Before the break, we were just looking at some old pictures of Rocky Mount Mills and that area. As I said, we've shown these pictures before. These aren't new pictures, but every now and again I like to go back and look at these pictures just to kind of re-cement in our minds. As I said at the top of the show, Rocky Mount Mills was certainly very instrumental in development of Rocky Mount, early Rocky Mount, and indeed this part of the state. And so there's so much history down there. And, there's so many memories. My mother grew up on the Mill Hill. My grandmother both worked there. My father worked there for a while. I had multiple aunts and uncles and great aunts and great uncles that worked there. And so I have a very, very close personal connection with Rocky Mount Mills. And it was a lot of fun to me to research and find out some of the things during this week's show preparation that I did not know. And one was the extent to which the mill went to try to keep our boys overseas connected to home here. So we'll get to those in just a minute. Lee, item number 11, if you would. This is a picture, obviously an aerial shot of Rocky Mount Mills from 1924. And a couple things that jump out at me about this picture. Number one, it's an aerial photograph. Now keep in mind, in 1924, there wasn't a whole lot of airplanes flying around Rocky Mount or anywhere for that matter. So I can only guess who took this picture. I would first thought would be a crop duster, maybe some amateur photographer in a crop dusting plane. But an aerial photograph of Rocky Mount Mills from 1924 is indeed a rare photograph. And so, like I said, this is one that I've had in my collection for some time, and we have shared it on the show before. But it's just every now and again it's neat to go back and look at these old pictures, just kind of refresh our memory about what this area was like, how much it's changed over the years, and how much the Rocky Mount Mill has contributed to Rocky Mount's overall growth. Okay, Lee, item number 12 I think is the last one in this grouping, and this is a very small picture, and this is from 1940. And if you remember, we've talked about this before too. In 1940, there was a major renovation took place at the mill, and DJ Rose, the DJ Rose Construction Company, was actually in charge of doing the renovation. And so I'm not exactly sure what was going on here, but at the bottom of the postcard, if you'll notice, it says February the 26th. The temperature was 12 degrees. So just about this time of year, and it was a very brutally cold day to be out there doing construction work at the Rocky Mount Mills in February of 1940. But anyway, that's how it was, as the old saying goes. Okay, I mentioned earlier about the Riverside Bulletin. I had such fun looking through this. I found 3 of these things actually. There were hundreds, if not thousands of them, because it was, well, I say thousands, probably not thousands. It was published every week, once a week, I do believe. And I'm not sure it went the entire duration of the war, but certainly from 1944 and 1945 up through the end of the war, in fact. The Riverside Bulletin was published, and it was sent out literally all over the world. And so item number 13, if you would, Lee, this is actually the July 12th, 1944 edition of the Riverside Bulletin. Most of these newspapers varied in size from 15 to 18 to 25 pages thereabout, and they was just chock-a-block full of little tidbits of information about everything from who was dating who to who got a new whatever, to what was going on at the mill, who got promoted, who got a job transfer or whatever. But it was also, there was information for the folks back home about our guys overseas. So when someone would make rank, they'd get into promotion or whatever. When they would get injured, there were even occasional posts where unfortunately someone had gotten killed in combat. And so the guys who were in the military and the service overseas, serving their country, would write back to the mill and say, look, we appreciate what you're doing. We thank you so much for keeping us in touch. And here's a little bit about what I'm going through. And so the soldiers and sailors and Marines and airmen would write letters back to the mill, and the mill would publish their letters. And there was just a lot of good information from the war fighters back to the people back home, and then from the mill sharing what was going on back home with the war fighters. But as I said, I found at least 3 issues, and I know there were many others. And if anyone has gotten, I mentioned earlier that I had heard about a combining, if you will, of the entire grouping of all these Riverside Bulletin newspapers into some sort of book. I'd love to see one of those. I'm not sure, but it seemed like I've seen one once before somewhere. I just don't remember where it was. It may have been in the library. But anyway, let's go to item number 14, Lee. This was the Rocky Mount Mills School. We've talked about this school many times on the show. And these kids are not identified, and so I don't know for sure about any of them. But I'm fairly certain that the little boy on the right-hand side of your screen, directly behind the little girl there on the right-hand side in a long white dress, the little boy standing behind her, I even broke out a magnifying glass today, and I'm almost certain that was my Uncle Melvin Paris. Some of you may remember Melvin. He's passed away now some years ago. But in 1945, he would have been about 10 or 11 years old. And so this little boy looks to be about 10, 11 years old. And I've seen some pictures of Melvin as a young boy, and I believe that might be him. But this says, pupils of Mrs. W.A. Patterson held a musical recital recently at the Rocky Mount Mills School. A large crowd was present for the occasion. A lot of these children have grown up since a lot of you fellows left the mill, but you can recognize a lot of them. Little side note about this, Bugs Behringer was one of the editors of this newspaper. So he worked with the mill to produce this newspaper and send it out to our guys all over the world. Okay, Lee. Item number 15. Well, another neat thing about this was Rocky Mount Mills had their own pinup girls. And every week in every edition, they would highlight a pinup girl. And I can just picture these guys, in foxholes all around the world, getting their weekly edition of the Rocky Mount Mills Riverside Bulletin and looking at these pinup girls. And I imagine a whole lot of catcalling and whistling and so forth going on. But this young lady here was Miss Dorothy Register, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Pratt Register of 32 River Drive. She is employed in the spinning department. And so this was appeared in August 1945. And this young lady here was one of many pinup girls, and that's how they were identified, as a pinup girl. So, pretty lady there. I'm not certain, but I think I know her kids. I'm not positive about that, but I think I know her kids. Item number 16, if we could, Lee. Another pinup girl. This will, it says here the caption, this pretty pinup girl for this week is Ms. Margie Vester, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. C.W. Vester of Route 3. She is employed in the canteen of Rocky Mount Mills. Interestingly enough, my great aunt, we called her Aunt Bumpsy. Her name was actually Balmer Lee. Some of you may remember Balmer Lee. She was Balmer Lee Watson before she married Ivan Price over in Battleboro. But Balmer Lee Watson, my Aunt Balmer Lee, who we called Bumpsy, worked in the canteen, probably right along beside this lady right here. And I've seen references while I was reading through some of these bulletins and saw reference to my Aunt Bumpsy and the fact that she worked in the canteen. And I've also seen reference to several other family members of mine. Harold Rackley was my great uncle, and Harold at one time was, I don't know the exact title, but he was pretty high up in management at Rocky Mount Mills. In fact, he and his family, his wife was Helen Rackley, they lived in what we refer to in the family as the old Lewis home, now referred to as Stonewall Mansion up there, or Stonewall Manor, I should say. But anyway, like I said, I had several aunts and uncles and great aunts and great uncles that worked at the mill. It was really neat to read through this newspaper and see these names of my family members and what they were doing during World War II with the mill. Item number 17, if we could, Lee. This pretty pinup girl for the week is Miss Mavis King, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. C.W. King of 117 West Ridge Street. She has been employed in the finishing department. So, again, these pictures of these girls and these, scenes of people from the mill, it had to warm these guys' hearts to be all, some of them 10,000 miles from home, fighting in a war, and probably, seeing the horrors of war firsthand. It had to be uplifting and really special to these guys to get one of these papers in the mail. And my understanding is the mill paid for this. They paid to have the thing published. They paid to ship them off all over the world. And that was no small expense, I'm sure, to send thousands of these newspapers all over the world to soldiers fighting for the country. Okay, Lee, item number 18, if we could. I wish this picture were clearer. It's a terrible picture. But here's a whole swath of bathing beauties here. And by the way, this is from August the 8th of 1945. World War II, of course, is drawing to a close now. And it said, instead of one pinup girl this week, we have a half a dozen bathing beauties. The girls, all from Rocky Mount Mills, competed in the annual Junior Chamber of Commerce Beauty Contest at the municipal pool last week. The girls are, left to right, Miss Tilly Fuller, Miss Mary Hinton, Miss Dorothy Whitley, Miss Jeanette Rivenbark, Miss Margie Watkins, and Miss Mavis King. So if any of you know any of these ladies, give me a call. Maybe you recognize yourself. Give me a call if you do. But this had to warm the hearts of these guys, these soldiers and sailors and Marines all around the world, to get these newspapers and see these girls from back home. And I'm sure it was just a welcome sight. Item number 19, if we could, Lee. This is actually another instance of the Riverside Bulletin. And I mentioned earlier that sometimes the fighting men themselves would actually send a letter back to the mill. And I want to read a few of these to you. It says, this is from June 1944, by the way. It says, "Dear sir, you and your staff have done a fine job on the bulletin, and I know you will continue to do so. I get a lot of pleasure out of reading the bulletin. It is so much like a letter from home. I always read the entire paper. I want to get every bit from it that I can. I must close now, still wishing you a great deal of success. I am, as ever before, Louis J. Mathis, somewhere in France, June 25th, 1944. Someone here's addressing Bugs Barringer directly. Says, "Hi, Bugs. For several months now, your welcome paper has been coming to me regularly. I enjoy it very much and pass it on to the fellows in my outfit from Rocky Mount. They are Corporal George Caudle and Staff Sergeant Billy Farmer. All three of us have been overseas well over 2 years and are all together in France. Things in our area are settled down and the supplies and equipment and men continue to move in. Mail has arrived and mess facilities are daily improving. We all hope to be home soon, at least by Christmas time. Of course, that same rumor comes up every spring. Oh well, the Army lives on rumors. My wife writes very often and she is planning on being in the USA this fall. Please continue to send the paper and tell all our friends hello and bonjour for present. Sincerely, Herman Stevens." The picture you see there is Private First Class A.J. English, who was recently transferred from Lincoln, Nebraska to Clovis, New Mexico. He has been assigned as an aerial gunner on a heavy bomber. Before entering the Army, he was employed in the finishing department. So obviously he was getting ready to go to war as a bomber, as a gunner on a bomber. The upper right-hand article here says, "Dear editor, just a few lines to let you know that I've been receiving my copies of the Riverside Bulletin. I want you to know that I thoroughly enjoy reading every line of it, and thanks a million. I hope you will continue to send it. It's like receiving a long letter from home, and I'm always anxious to know how the home front is doing. I notice that a lot of my buddies are landing in England, and I'm looking forward to meeting some of them here in France. Here's hoping it won't be long before all of us will be home to stay. Thanks again for sending the papers. Sincerely, Sam Boswell." And lastly says, "Dear Mr. Henry, I have just received another copy of the Riverside Bulletin, which reminds me that I should take time to write a few lines and say thanks a million to you and to everyone who has any part in sending the paper to me. I enjoy it very much. I think that news from home is just about the best news to us who are so far from home and friends. When I was home on furlough, I enjoyed the privilege I had to visit the mill and to see you while there. I could not help but think how nice it would be just to forget the war and go back to Rocky Mount Mills. But there's another job that we must do now, and until it is done, we'll work and pray and think how to best do our work. So, these guys were literally living and dying in a faraway land in a war that they obviously didn't want to be in, but had no choice. And lastly, Lee, put up item number 20 if we could. This young lady here is Miss Betty Gibson. She's 19 years old in August of 1944. Tell me she doesn't look like Betty White. When I first saw her, I thought, my God, that's Betty White. But it's not. It's Betty Gibson, 19 years old, the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Joseph P. Gibson of 618 Pender. Betty's employed in the finishing department. Very attractive lady there, Miss Gibson. I've got to do some more research on this because Gibson was my grandmother's maiden name. So now I've got another mystery to go solve. I never remember hearing this lady's name, and I don't recall my grandmother having any sisters named Betty. She has several, but never one named Betty. So I don't know who this lady is, but now I've got to find out. Folks, that's going to do it for us tonight. We've run slam out of time. I want to thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks for those who called in and shared your memories. I appreciate you as always. Have a great week, folks. Take care of yourselves. Be kind to one another, and we'll see you next week with more Wayback Wednesday. Good night.